Hello everyone and welcome. We are expecting quite a few more, but we'll see who's able to make it with us tonight. Just before we kick off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet, the Awabakal people. I'd also like to, acknowledge any of Aboriginal people here in the room with us, and just as I did at the Collaborative a couple of weeks ago, recognise that we are stronger and better from working with our Aboriginal community, and particularly in this area of suicide prevention. And I look forward to the things that we're going to do locally. I also, on that note, want to recognise the people with lived experience who may be in the room here tonight with us. And although this forum and this event is really targeting health professionals, I think it's also important to remember that even as or maybe even particularly as health professionals, working in this field can also take a personal toll, whether that be from our work or because we're supporting someone in our own personal lives or our own direct experience of suicidality. So I just wanted to, acknowledge that we hold that with us here and encourage people to, again, look after yourself tonight, look out for each other, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we go with it. I think there are a couple of other things I wanted to do just in terms of welcoming everyone here. My name's Katie McGill. I am one of the coordinators for the Lifespan project. Tegan Cottrell is the other one. So we'll, just to give people a little bit of context, Lifespan is a systems-wide approach to suicide prevention that is being trialled in the Newcastle region over the next 2 years. We are the first site in New South Wales, essentially in Australia, to trial this systems approach. And what it means for us locally is that there's a whole heap of activities that are going to be rolled out that is really focused on how we increase the capacity, not just of health services and health service providers, but also the community to be able to support people who are suicidal or after a suicide attempt. And really the aim is looking at how we reduce suicide deaths and reduce suicide attempts. So we're running Expert Insights here tonight. This is the first time it's been run in Newcastle. I think it's the first time it's been run outside of Sydney. Vera will be able to tell us a little bit more about it. And we're really doing it as, a bit of a pilot to get a bit of a sense about what's the interest, what's the appetite, how does it work, does this fit our community, and what role would it play within Lifespan in terms of being a useful way for us to think about how we use the evidence and wisdom that we have on the ground about how we do suicide prevention. Anyone who wants to know more about Lifespan Newcastle, please talk to Tegan or I. The other ways to find out more is we do have a web page or a couple of web pages. If you just Google HIMH and Lifespan, it's the second one on the list, and there's a whole heap of information there. And we also have a mailing list that you can sign up to that will let you know as various activities come out. Enough about that, and Tegan. The really exciting and important thing tonight is thank you to the panel for agreeing, and for Berit as well for coming down from Sydney to facilitate tonight. I've already mentioned this is the first time we've done this, so it's really exciting for us. I'm also going to flag, I'm sure there will be hiccups tonight as we give things a go and see what works. So, one of the things we'll be doing is kind of trying to manage the mic situation and making sure people who speak have a microphone. That will include, our panel members will sort of be swapping it around, but there will be opportunities for questions to come from the floor, and I would just ask people to make sure you get a mic before you ask the question, particularly as we have people, coming in with us on the webinar, so they will only be able to hear the questions and the comments if someone's mic'd up. I think they're the main things. We've got a great panel. I'm excited. Is there anything else? Thank you, everyone. Talk to you soon.
thank you, Katie, and thank you, Katie and Ian and the PHN also for setting up this wonderful night today. It's such a pleasure for us to be up here bringing expert insights to Newcastle. We've been doing expert insights for about 2.5 years in Sydney, and really the idea is to gather the clinical community together, so a local conversation among clinicians working in the mental health sector, having a bit of an interaction, getting to know one another, getting more familiar with each other's work, together with the discussion around a mental health topic that's of interest from a clinical perspective. And to do that, getting in resource people to join that conversation for you. And when we use the word expert, we're using it kind of in its fullest meaning. So sure, we have researchers, we have clinicians, but we've also got lived experience, both of mental health experience and also the carer experience. So really giving that well-rounded background to be able to enrich the conversation that we have today. So today we're really focusing on suicide prevention, and specifically we've chosen the topic of falling through the cracks because I'm sure you've all had the experience of caring for someone at risk of suicide and the difficulty of maintaining that continuity of care when you're creating a team to care for that person, how hard it is sometimes to transition up and down levels of care to and fro health professionals. And so today's conversation is really going to look a little bit about what we know about what works, what do people's experience tell us about what's effective, what's accessible, and what's acceptable for them, and to really think again at a local level here in Newcastle, what are some of the things that we could be doing better or differently to make sure people don't fall between the cracks. To introduce myself, I'm Vera Gordon. I'm a GP, so I work full-time in general practice. As well as that, I spend a day a week developing and facilitating health professional education at the Black Dog Institute. So it's my other hat that I'm wearing tonight. I might just get our wonderful panel to introduce themselves. So we're going to just hear a little bit from each of them so you can be familiar with their backgrounds before we launch into the conversation itself. So we might just go across the line. So you happy to start, Jeff? Go for it.
Hey, good evening. My name's Jeff. I'm 47. I live locally at Maryland, out there with my little 7-year-old little daughter. Prior to February last year, I was fully employed in the mining industry. I've been there for 10 years in underground mines, working around New South Wales, Bowen Basin in Queensland and Western Australia, in particular the Argyle Diamond Mine up in the Kimberley. Prior to joining the mining industry, I was a senior constable of police. I was in the New South Wales Police and the Queensland Police. I stayed in Queensland. I was stationed at Bundaberg and in New South Wales. I started out in Northern Beaches. I ended up out in the western suburbs of Sydney, out of Mount Druitt and Penrith. I left the service in 2003. And as I said, I mentioned before, up until February last year, that's when I ceased work. I was diagnosed with delayed onset chronic PTSD. I basically, I got to a stage, I got to a very dark place, and I attempted suicide, tried to take my own life. A lot of drug overdose. I was basically scheduled and brought here to the MARTA. And ever since I've been in the mental health system, I've been very proactive in my recovery, and basically I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us, Chair. Really glad to have you here.
Good.
Hi everyone. Is that on? Yes, I think it is. So I'm Fiona Smith. I'm from the Black Dog Institute in Sydney, and I'm part of the research team leading the evaluation of the lifespan trial. I'm also a clinical psychologist in private practice, and so as Vera was saying, I'm aware of some of the challenges around you know, working with people when they're in crisis or recovering from a suicide attempt, and some of the difficulties of working across the private sector and the public sector and the communication that can get a bit muddled at times. So, so I guess my role on the panel tonight is to talk a little bit about what we know from the research in terms of what works for care after a suicide attempt, how some improvements might be made, and also what we know from the research coming out about what people are actually asking for, both people who have had a suicide attempt, but also families and carers of those people. So really pleased to be here, and I think it's great to have a panel with such broad experience across the sector and with lived experience as well, because I think it really brings the subject to life. So thanks for inviting us.
Hi everyone, how are you? My name is Mel Clark, and I am here representing families' lived experience. So I'm part of a family who cares for a loved one with a dual diagnosis, and I'm very privileged to be here. I also work in the welfare sector, so I work across community with various diverse groups, and I'm very passionate about reducing trauma in our community. So hopefully tonight I'll be able to share some of my lived experience and our family's experience caring for my brother, and we have had approximately 16 years experience in and out of mental health related institutions, and yeah, a varied journey. So I'm happy to share with you what I can tonight to hopefully close some gaps and do what we can to do this together.
Sorry. Yep. Hi, my name is Chris Wilcox. I'm Head of Mental Health Psychology for Hunter New England Local Health District Mental Health Service. Look, I guess I'm here wearing a few hats. I'm a clinician who's worked for about the last 30 years with people with borderline personality disorder and working at the more severe end of that, so people with chronic suicidal ideation, self-harm, that sort of thing. And I do my clinical work from a place called the Centre for Psychotherapy. But I also, at a state level, are part of a group who review, we do something called RCA, so root cause analyses, when people go on to kill themselves or kill others, and at a state level we review all of those. So as a group we look at those, we look for patterns, and we make recommendations, develop guidelines to change services. And what we're really trying to look at is how we decrease the incidence of suicide. And unfortunately I'm saying decrease rather than get rid of altogether. That's kind of an impossible task. But really just trying to look at not losing the lived experiences of those people who continue not to live, and can we learn from that and get not only our services here to change, but the services across the other districts, and also the development of guidelines and training around how, as a whole, do we go better. In many respects, I think I know more about the questions and the answers from that process, but I'll do my best as we go along tonight.
Fantastic, and I think you'll have to agree with me, we're very lucky to have such a broad range of experience and so much that we can learn from tonight. So the way the evening runs, for the first sort of 20-25 minutes, I'll ask some questions of the panel just so you can get a bit of a sense of some of their areas of expertise, and after that we're going to hand over to you so that you can ask your questions. So please, if a question comes into your mind, jot it down and you'll get your chance to ask it as the evening goes along. So Chris, I might get you to start. Just you're kind of our local clinician and have a bit of a sense of how things run here in Newcastle. For someone kind of experiencing a continuum of care at risk of suicide, what are some of the services or professions that they might encounter? What are some of the different fragments of care they might?
Okay, I guess in terms of coming into the local mental health service, and we're only one part of the responders within the health service, we have now a 1-800 number which is given out, you know, here, there and everywhere. You can go and Google it, that sort of thing. On one level that sounds a little bit impersonal, you get a 1-800 number, but what it does is when you ring that, it goes through to a state number, it works out you're actually ringing locally, and then it will put you through to our local triage service. At that point, it's about letting them know what's going on for you, a neighbour, a friend, a loved one, or what have you, And what that service is going to be doing is what we call triaging. So they're going to try and make some sense of how quickly do we need to respond. So in some cases they're going to be going, actually, we need you to bring in your family member now, and depending on where you are in the district, that could be coming into the psychiatric emergency centre here, but equally, at Moree, it could be going into the general hospital there, where we now have telepsychiatry links, so we can have psychiatrists moving from here out to there in terms of doing an assessment and working out what needs to be done. Equally, what people might be going is, okay, so we don't need to respond now, but what things can we look at putting in place that's going to keep you safe until we do have an assessment? So there may be a decision that, well, we don't need to respond here and now, we really want to catch up with you on the next day or two. So, you know, who have you got around to care for you? What are your strengths? If things don't work out, we want you to get back in contact with us, that sort of thing. Once you actually then come into our mental health services, it's really going to depend on level of acuity, diagnoses, that sort of thing, in terms of what services you're initially directed to. So we have some what we call generalist mental health services or community mental health services that cover geographical areas, but we also have some specialist services. So think about my work with borderline personality disorder. We're a specialist service that I was the project officer helped set up back in 1998, and so it's going to be looking at longer term specialist models of psychological intervention. Equally, if you come before the generalist teams, what they might be doing at that point is not putting into place a longer term piece of work, but rather what do we need to do at this point in this time with you, with those around you, to maximise your safety. So it's going to be a person by person where we're going to be working out what we see as being the risk, and on the basis of that then what we need to put in place. Equally, for instance, if you would present to, so the MARTA here has a mental health section, but it also has the old Calvary MARTA. And for instance, if you were to present having taken an overdose, you would come in through the Calvary ED, not the mental health section, and you're going to be linked back to a service that's currently run by primary health care here, and so there's a callback program that's run. So it's really going to depend on where you present, where you get directed. I think it's really important, though, as kind of a take-home message, if you're caring for somebody and you're concerned for them, keep knocking on the door, advocate, because at times you're going to bump into some really busy services, and they're going to be focusing on the crisis in front of them, and you want to make sure that whoever you're caring for doesn't get lost in that process. And that's true for us inside the system as well. There have been times when I had to walk patients down to our acute units and actually advocate on behalf of the patient, going, look, I know that they have chronic suicidal ideation, however, at this moment it is different, it's acute. I really want you to take this seriously. The same as if I was suddenly suicidal, that's different to how I normally am, I want you to take it very seriously. So it kind of works both ways. I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to field further questions.
Yeah, great. No, that's really helpful. So I might turn to you, Fiona. Certainly looking at what happens to people after an attempt can be a bit indicative of people's journey through the system, through care. You're involved in some research looking at what happens for people after a suicide attempt. What were some of the findings of that research?
Yeah, and I guess just to frame that, I think what happens here in Newcastle is quite different to what happens in other parts of Australia. So, for example, anyone who has self-poisoning here in Newcastle gets admitted through the MARTA. That's not what happens in other parts of Australia. You guys also have the Wayback service at the moment, which is not widely available at the moment. So in some ways you're better resourced than a lot of other parts of the country in this area. So when I talk about the research, some of it will be applicable to what happens here, some of it will be less so. So we did do a study where we both interviewed people who'd had a suicide attempt, people who cared for people who'd had a suicide attempt. We ran some surveys and we actually looked at hospital data to see what happened to people over a period of time. And what we found in looking at more than 40,000 hospital admissions, so these are people who are admitted to hospital for deliberate self-harm, and in the rest of Australia that typically doesn't happen unless it's a medically serious incident or the person is still at risk. So we're talking about kind of the more serious end of the spectrum. About 60% of them had any contact with the public health system in the months following their discharge from hospital. So there's about 40% of people who we don't really know what happened to. They may have had some contact with private healthcare providers, but no contact with the public system. And about 40% of those people actually had a face-to-face session with community mental health. So there's a lot of people who are being discharged from hospital following a suicide attempt and not, as far as we know, getting an awful lot of follow-up care. Now that first month following discharge is a particularly high-risk period, so that's fairly concerning, I think. Was backed up also by what we found from both our qualitative interviews with people and the surveys. And coming out of both of those pieces of research, what we were finding was that people were saying it's the small acts of kindness that really make a difference. And one of the things that we did find was that if people had a poor experience with their first contact with a health service provider or a frontline person, then they were far less likely to say that they would seek help the next time they were in trouble. So that's not rocket science, obviously. If you have a bad experience, you're not going to want to open up the next time around, but it is concerning. So people were saying that really human side of the response was absolutely critical to them. That can be difficult in a busy ED where EDs are particularly good at patching up physical injuries and other physical problems, and perhaps less focused on the psychological distress. So I think that's one area where we can really start to focus our attentions. The other thing that people were talking about was they felt that they were lucky if they did find good care. And the people who felt like they weren't lucky actually had great difficulty navigating their way through what's a fairly complex health system. And so I think the other point where we can make a difference is in providing help for people to coordinate their care, to navigate their way through care, and where possible to make it a fairly seamless process. So where possible in overseas models that have the same person who's the point of contact for that person. And in fact, we know that if that relationship is disrupted, that can actually cause problems and can create a break in the system where people are more at risk of having another suicide attempt. So there's a lot of areas where we feel like we can make some real improvements, and we think we know where some of those are, and I will perhaps come back and comment on some of that rather than hold the microphone for longer.
Thanks, Fiona. So I might then go to Jeff. You at some point would have realised that you were unwell, becoming unwell, and needed to find assistance. How did you go about finding the help, and what helped you find the right help for you?
Basically, my first point of contact was through private. I'd spoken to other boys that were experiencing chronic post-traumatic stress, and I ended up being referred to St John of God, Richmond Hospital, and they're brilliant, very good at what they do. But basically, following my suicide attempt, or surviving my suicide attempt, I made mention of the way back service, and that was enormous. Played an enormous role in my start of my journey and my recovery, and the contact from caseworkers, and sometimes it was every couple of days I was getting a phone call from a caseworker, and it basically it was that personal contact, and it made me feel that I did matter, and there instilled a bit of faith that there are people out there that genuinely care, and it changed my day. And as mentioned, for 3 weeks after my attempt, it is a critical stage because I felt, I still felt lost. I still felt, like I was spun out in the street and I was lost. I didn't know what to do. I was still, so that follow-up from the wayback service was very important to me, and it pretty much launched my journey and gave me the legs to carry on. And basically, I've only just got back from St John of God. I've done a month residential course down there for closed trauma with other boys that suffer the same, and it was very beneficial. It equipped me with a lot of good tools to use. I say, I made the joke down there, we get tagged and released, we get researched, we get tagged and released, and we get put back out in the general population. But the tools that they equip you with to get back out in a general pop is it's amazing what they achieve.
And with the Wayback Service, how quickly did you become involved with them? Like at what point?
Very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, someone contacted me from the Wayback Service probably 3 days after being discharged from the Marley. So yeah, and my caseworker, lovely lady, and we formed a very good friendship over the phone, and she got my trust and confidence, and she was obviously good at what she did, and she yeah. So.
And Melvin, I might check with you. You know, sometimes for us as health professionals, navigating the system is complex. What's it like for families when you've got a loved one that is at risk? How do families manage that complexity?
Not the best sometimes. Look, it's confusing, it's frustrating, it's overwhelming at times. It's hard to pinpoint those emotions through each admission, or leading up to an admission, or leading into a discharge. So it depends on where you are in the process as to how families are feeling, what services will be available, what emotional support's there, are there carer support services available, can they come to the party as you need them. Yeah, it's a whole kit bag of emotions, really. From a sister's perspective, it's really challenging for me. My brother is an adult, so it's nice to know that he's part of our family, but we don't necessarily have a lot of control over his choices, and that within itself is tough. Had he, if he was a younger child, we would probably have more ability to, guide him and nurture him through different services and choices. But as an adult, it's much tougher than that. So we have to respect his choices. We have to observe his level of wellness or unwellness, depending on where he's at. It can be weeks or sometimes months between contact, and as family we may not have spoken to him for, say, 2 months, and when we do make contact, he's well. Sometimes, another 2 months down the track, it's he's traumatised and he's in crisis, and it depends on his living choices and his situational crisis at the time as to how we as family cope with that and what we do when that happens. So, it's not linear, if that makes sense.
Do you find as family it can sometimes be hard to be heard by services or by health professionals?
I think I'm a little bit different because I'm affiliated now with the Consumer Participation Unit with Hunter New England Health. So I have more of a voice than some families would, and I'm doing what I can to educate clinicians from the inside and from the outside, and that's been very helpful for my healing journey as a loved one, as the carer. I know it's very challenging for my parents, and we come from a separated family, so my brother and I grew up in separated homes, so it's been challenging for all of our family, depending on what those dynamics are at the time. So I know my dad, he struggles emotionally with my brother, how to respond in times of crisis. He comes from a certain culture that is different to my mum's, and sometimes that adds another element of challenge, because mum's like, well, your father's doing this, or, you know, it's not really showing that he cares at this point. Yeah, that's not really true. You know, we deal with things differently. It's a different journey for every one of us.
So Chris, I might check with you. We often talk about services rather than treatments. Why is that distinction important?
I'll come to that in a roundabout way. I just want to build a little bit on what Mel has just said. So sitting in this building here, if you went 2 floors higher, we have a consumer unit, and so we have somebody with a lived experience for mental illness, and we employ a number of people in similar situations who help inform our thinking and our planning. And we also have the carers group as well. So depending on people's interests, there's a regular and active care group, and there's a regular and active consumer unit. And so currently I'm part of a group that is looking at transfer of care. So this is where we are looking at potential breakdown in relationships when people move from one service to another. And as part of that, we've got a consumer rep on that who we're really saying they bring a piece of advice from outside, of wisdom from outside. When you work inside an institution, you can get used to doing things in particular ways, and we really need somebody, to some degree, who's an expert at looking at the system from a different perspective to help us through with that. In terms of your question about service versus treatment, so if I think about the patient population that I work with, people with borderline personality disorder, when I first joined mental health services, this was a group of people who were seen as being untreatable, not core business, and indeed, if they wanted to do it, they would. The world has moved a long way since then, but what we saw at that stage, people would get a service. In other words, they would present to a mental health service somewhere, they would be expressing their distress, their suicidality, etc. Essentially, there would be an assessment, there would be a therapeutic band-aid of some sort put on the person, and then they would be waved by. Now, what we know is that untreated, this particular patient population, 10% of these people will go on to kill themselves. What we know is that treated, and so I talk about our experience at the Centre for Psychotherapy, so we've been going for 19 years now. We've literally had hundreds and hundreds of people come through, and we have a number of different treatment programs now. And across that time, we've only had 2 people suicide. So there's a very radical change in people's outcomes where we can put into place longer-term treatment. That said, though, not everybody, when they first present, has got their hand in the air saying, what I want at this stage is treatment. Sometimes at that particular point, what needs to be done is a piece of focused work around what increased their risk. And so at a state level, there's something called Project AIR, and so they're looking at short, sharp, focused interventions for those people where that's the appropriate thing to do at that stage. So this is really about stepped care. This is about trying to work out what would make sense for this person at this point in time that they are prepared to consider. Because it is very much a, therapy is very much a collaborative relationship. Unless you can have the 2 of you in there, then it's not going to work. I hope that kind of answers the question.
And just staying with that, Fiona, I might just check with you, talking about kind of that old feelings of hopelessness around can people be helped to keep safe, can things change? There are some interventions we know that are effective. What are some of the things we know, for example, after an attempt that actually do help?
Yes, there's actually a range, and I want to pick up on that idea of, working with clients or patients at the point they're at in terms of the intensity of the intervention and what they're willing to engage with. There is this idea that people can be hard to engage, and that may be true, but it may also be that it's just that they don't want what we're offering. So, I think it's worth thinking about some of the lower intensity interventions that are less intrusive, but can still reduce risk. So we know that there are things like brief contact interventions, and your own Greg Carter here who's done a lot of work in that area around, and his work has really been around sending regular postcards to people saying, it's been a short time since you were here, we hope things are going well, please contact us if you need, or something like that. Might not have the wording quite right. And similarly, a series of brief phone calls can also be effective in reducing the risk of a repeat attempt or a number of repeat attempts. There's also safety planning. So the safety planning intervention that was designed by Barbara Stanley and Greg Brown over in the US, mainly for veteran populations. And it really is taking off here in Australia as well. Beyond Blue have put together an app around safety planning called Beyond Now. And really it's about quite a brief intervention where you step through with the person around what are some of the early warning signs that things might not be going well for you, what are some of your own internal coping strategies that you could use. If that's not working, what are some of the external sources of help that you could draw on? So, and what are some of the reasons for living? So it's a fairly brief intervention that some very recent research shows is effective in reducing risk in a randomised controlled trial. You then move on to some of the more intensive interventions. So coming out of some of the Scandinavian countries, there are a number of models, but the key elements are really around that quite fast follow-up after discharge. We know that very quick contact after someone has been discharged is important. People are still feeling very raw, not always able to make decisions easily. So that assertive outreach is critical. So we've got quick follow-up, we've got fairly assertive outreach where we're making contact with them, not waiting for people to get in touch with us. That coordination of care, that continuity of contact with people. While people are still in hospital, doing a good psychosocial assessment, so not just a risk assessment, this is not just about kind of categorising people into the level of care they need, but actually working with the person to understand what got them to that point. So we think about a psychological case formulation, that kind of thing. So saying, so what is it that got you to the point? What are some of the things that we can actually change and fix here? And then working with them to case manage some of those things. So there's really that that spectrum of intensity that we can work with around some of the fairly brief interventions through to the more intensive follow-up. And then if we look at the specific methods of therapy that work, we know DBT, particularly for people with borderline personality characteristics. CBT that's targeted at suicidal ideation is also effective. And again, I think there's a lot of research that's been done in the last 10 years. So we've moved a long way from the idea that if someone wants to kill themselves, then they will, and there's nothing much we can do about it. I think we've moved an awfully long way from that point.
And following that up, I might just check with Jeff. What do you think most helped you? Like, what do you think was really effective in helping you in your recovery?
Yeah, it was obviously a very pride-swallowing experience for me. But the main thing was the speed in getting contacted by a caseworker. I mean, I mentioned before that first 3 weeks after a person tries to take their own life is it's a very critical stage because you just feel like you're spun out in the street and lost. But yeah, I was very fortunate, and to speak to people that they were genuinely concerned, and they were professional in their job, and they basically they gave me the feeling that they cared. So and that was huge to me, and it gave, as I said before, it gave me the legs to because I didn't want to experience anything like that ever again. So and ever since I've been as proactive as I can. And yeah, and basically that's why I'm here tonight. I'm more than happy to share my experience, and if it can help someone else down the track, well, yeah, it's all good.
Certainly linking with that kindness Fiona was talking about, that care and kindness certainly seems to be a theme, something that really makes a difference to people.
Yeah. I mean, in today's world, it's easy to think and get lost, and for a lot of people out there, they think they're just another number. But at the end of the day, we are just another number. We're all important numbers, and that's, as I said, with the way back service. I mean, there it was. I honestly don't think I'd be where I am at the stage of my journey today if it wasn't for their initial contact. Yeah, so it was pretty important.
Good, do you want to add something?
Yeah, just in terms of follow-up, and this is not so much coming through the calorie marking, but the mental health services in general when people are now discharged from hospital. There's 2 things that we're doing. One is we're following up people within 48 hours. So what we know is it's the level of engagement, the connection, that is really, really important. So the first, that's a recent change and a recent recommendation. When I say recent, the last couple of years. But a number of years back, when we were looking at indeed where things went wrong, what we were aware was that public mental health services weren't very good at connecting people to the next stage post-discharge. And so we just put in place some simple recommendations. And the simple recommendations went along the lines of, when anybody is being discharged from hospital, they need to actually be given an appointment with somebody, be given an appointment within a week, to actually have the name of the person they were going to be seeing, to be given a card with how to contact that person's service, their name, their mental health 1-800 number to call, and where possible, where we're dealing with families as well, also sitting with them and going, okay, if things start going out of shape, these are the ways that you may contact the services. They're actually fairly simple things that we can do that we know significantly decrease risk. So it isn't always rocket science and it isn't always expensive. The reference to Greg Carter's work, I mean, that was something that he was kind of the first in the world doing, those follow-up postcards. What was discovered through that process, once again, not rocket science, really simple. I guess it was rocket science because it was new, nobody had flown this idea before. And what we noticed was that people's risk came down significantly. Once again, it's about connection. And as part of trying to look at someone working in their inpatient unit, how do we look at increasing engagement between staff and consumers as distinct from monitoring in a more kind of health-related monitoring?
Can I say something to that? I would have to say I love to hear that it's about the engagement, the initial engagement, and linking services to families upon discharge and making sure that families stay engaged. The problem with our family in particular, and a lot of families, are that their loved one is disengaged from them, they're disengaged from services long term, they're not engaged with a lot of people. So, you know, when my brother would be discharged, he would be discharged into our family where he's loved and cared for, and he's feeling well and well respected, and sometimes embarrassed because of the issues that he's caused. You know, we don't hold them against him. However, it's beyond the time that he goes back out into community that is more so our concern as family. And we know that when he's not connected with us, that he's potentially going to become unwell again. So our struggle is loving him while we have him, keeping him well while we can, and giving him as much information as we can, keeping in contact with him long term. So from a professional perspective, I would be saying increase your relationships with the families as well, the whole family, if you can, and keep that communication open for as long as you can.
We're going to move over now to the time where our audience can ask our questions. So, Tegan, you're going to be a roving microphone. So please wait till Tegan brings you the microphone so that people at home can actually hear your questions. Try and stay in a question format rather than a comment if you can. But we'd love to hear the things that you'd like to discuss, unless someone's got their hand back there for you.
Am I allowed to raise a few issues here?
Sorry,
a few things. Sorry,
Yeah, we're not getting it.
Is that on?
No.
I have backup batteries. We're organised.
Maybe we can use one of the other mics. So, yeah, if you can outline briefly, yes, you may. But if you can bring it to a question, that'd be great too.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Right. I just wanted to raise a few things. If I can just give a quick, brief history. I was diagnosed with bipolar type 1 in 2007.
and I have actually been in hospital every year since then, both private and public. What I want to say to both maybe Chris and Fiona is there is a real disconnect between privates and public still. So whether that can actually be somewhere where we can fill the gap. There is also talking about carers. I have had suicide attempts. My mother has actually found me both times. There is a disconnect with the service for her as well. So she doesn't actually cope well with it. So I think we've got some gaps there with carers, whilst there are some. The other thing is, look, I've got a nursing degree and a law degree. I'm studying my master's at the moment, and I've written a book on this very subject for bipolar. Yet I've fallen through the gaps many times. I know for me that it was denial for a long time, but there are, for me who's quite intelligent, what happens to those that probably aren't quite as intelligent or educated? It is a complex system to work through. It is a complex services to work through. So if I struggled for the last 10 years, how is somebody else supposed to get that help? And I acknowledge that you've got that telephone number, but when I'm in a crisis, there's no way I'm going to ring a telephone number. Sorry, just have to say it. You know, and my mother's not going to do it for me, so she just gets me straight to the hospital. But by the time I see my signs coming, it's too late, and because mine just turns straight away. I can't ring a number. My decision-making process is so poor. I can't ring a number. So what happens to those that haven't quite got that, you know, education, support to navigate the way through the health system, the mental health system, you know, the going from public to private. I've gone from private to public. I've been at Maitland Public and here at the Mater, James Fletcher. There's been no contact between the privates that I've also been to. I went to one in Sydney, was sent back here to the Mater from the private hospital in Sydney. There was no communication back then either. There's still a lot of communication lacking in the system as well. Definitely, I think there needs to be more support. Doctors and specialists need to be aware that what happens to mums at home who find their daughter has attempted suicide. If I'm intelligent, what happens to those people who can't navigate it? There's still a lot of gaps, and you know, I also think that after you've had an attempted suicide as well, it's a really hard road when you don't have a lot of connections, like input, you know, from the system. And I spent quite a few days here at ICU, and by the time I came out, I think I got one phone call, follow-up phone call, and then ended up going down to Toronto.
Thank you. Raised, as you say, quite a few important issues there. So we might let the panel respond to some of those things that you've raised for us. Is there a mic that works?
Obviously, the batteries don't play this.
We can come to the podium and talk.
So we'll see how we go and try not. Goodness gracious, my children will be out me at home. Look, I mean, I guess the first point is, look, there are still significant gaps. I mean, this is part of what this process is about. How do we bring all the various parts of health and community together to try and close those down? We will never close down all the gaps. Obviously, there's a great deal of wisdom in your case about when, forget about the phone, I need to get to hospital, and that's, once again, working out different plans with different people. In terms of communication between services, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is something we're picking up on a regular basis when we're looking at this, that communication is one of the areas where across the multiple systems
we fall down regularly. It's a pattern, and it's not as simple as us trying to communicate out to the world that we should communicate better because we know that bit doesn't work. It somehow is, though, about trying to get the important message out that we do need to get better at communicating. I mean, I can think of somebody that I've just finished working with, and when I first started with them, they were partly in the public system, they were partly in the private system. They also had a private psychiatrist. Each part of the system actually had a different diagnosis, a different treatment, and it wasn't until their treatment got consolidated with myself that we were able to start getting some communication and start getting a shared idea. But while ever people are a bit here and a bit there, and that's often, you know, we are a fragmented service, and one of the risks always of a fragmented service is you get fragmented treatment. And I think they're the sorts of things that we need to start looking about. How do we close down that fragmentation? Certainly if we think about mental health funding, there is more and more, when you see an increase in mental health funds, it's basically going to the non-public mental health sector. There's going to be more and more done out in NGO land, etc. So what we've got to get better is between our systems that keep changing, because NGOs are often on 3-year funding models. You think you've got something in place and then you watch it disappear. So I don't know the answers, but all I can say is I absolutely agree with you in terms of the gaps we've got, and we'd love to hear people's thoughts on
it. Improving communication is something that is of most importance, whether that be between family members, between families and services, families departments, wherever you sit in the journey. Is everyone familiar with this document? Doesn't everybody? This is called the 5-point plan. Yes? No? No. So for the last 10 years, the Family Care Advisory Committee for Hunter New England Health have been developing a document to improve communication between families and their service. And just recently, this document has been, what would you say?
Well, essentially, it's now become part of.
It's now become, that's right. It's part of standard practice. So basically, it's a 5-phase document that aims to assist clinicians and families to communicate better. I would encourage everyone in the room to follow up and see how they can get one of these documents.
It's mandatory training.
Excellent. Mandatory training. So with the Consumer Participation Unit, I have been assisting with the rollout of this 5-point plan. And I feel really privileged to be able to have done that. It's an opportunity for us as a family to have shared our journey with clinicians and to close some of those gaps where we have fallen through the cracks over the years. I can tell you personally that the level of engagement, my brother was admitted 4 months ago. Since this has been implemented, he's currently working. He's living out in the community on his own. He's touching base with us every 2 weeks. I have to say I'm extremely hopeful in this document. So if that gives anyone in this room hope, or on the webinar some hope that communication can change, I'm here to say it can.
Just because Mel hasn't mentioned it, somebody got an award today as part of the group working on this. And so, really, yeah, congratulations. We haven't trained all mental health staff in this yet. We've got about 1,700 staff across the district. When I was last looking at the figures for this, we were up to 300 and something, so it's still going to take a while. But this is really about, and it's as simple as we can. On one side is essentially instructions to staff, on the other side is instructions to carers, and it's about getting us on the same page. How do we work together in partnership around this? We've tried to make it simple, clear. These are the 5 steps that will really get the communication working much better. Doesn't mean we'll be perfect, but we're trying to head in that direction.
So firstly, thank you for your comments, and you could have actually written half of the report that we wrote on the problems that people experience following a suicide attempt and trying to find care. And in fact, we had people who work within the health system who still had trouble finding their way through it for their children and their loved ones. So it is a complicated system. And I think we've got a complicated system, we've got some complicated problems, we've got some complicated lives. And it's hard for the person who is experiencing those problems, it's hard for their family, and sometimes it's hard for the clinicians working in the system too, actually. And I think what that tells us is that there is a need for more support, not just for the person who is struggling with those issues, but also for their families. And it sounds like there has been a lot of work done in that space, and I take my hat off to you for your contribution for that. But also that there needs to be support and supervision for clinicians in this space too, because it's very easy to burn out, and it's very easy to become a bit cynical about whether you can actually make a difference or not. And so that importance of having a good case mix and good supervision in place is absolutely critical. There are some systems problems that are much more difficult to fix, I think, but it's really encouraging to hear that there is work progressing in that space. So hopefully, you know, if you're going through the same thing now, it might be a bit improved, and next year it might be a bit more improved again. So.
Good. There's a question front.
Hi, my question is to Chris. You know, with the follow-up that you got a few days after being discharged, like what sort of questions was it that they asked? Can you describe that a bit more? Like, were they like really direct in asking how you were?
Jeff, mate.
Oh, I'm left-handed. I always.
Well, no, basically the questions were essentially they had to get a picture that I was safe. They were direct questions. Yeah, they were very they were honest and direct questions, and also a lot of involving questions that, you know, required a bit more back from me, but they basically just needed to have a picture that I was safe. So yeah, that was. But I don't think there's any other way other than direct questions to establish that. But yeah, as I said, their main objective and their main concern was that I was safe, and that obviously, what didn't have any more thoughts of self-harm.
How did you feel being asked questions that were that direct? What was that like for you?
I think it was that was part of the realisation that if I was in any way in denial, you know, once I was getting asked these questions, I mean, you get off the phone from an interview and you run it through your head and you think about the questions that were asked. If you had any doubt that you were in a bad place, there was absolute after the interview, there was absolutely no doubt that you were right in the thick of it. So it was, I mean, for some people it may be confronting to be asked such direct questions, but I think for a lot of other people it'd be like a bit of a wake-up call, and they realise that, yeah, well, I am right in the thick of this dark place. So yeah.
Any other questions? Yep, it's been done there.
There we go. So, as a person who has I have like a 12-year long running history with currently the diagnosis is that depression and anxiety. I've been kind of I forget the name of it, but there's like a suicide prevention psychology services where they call you up afterwards and check how you're going a few days later. As a person who's typically like quite withdrawn from my support networks and like I feel a bit like a burden, so I definitely pull back. So essentially, like there's not necessarily that caring the carer's perspective. When I'm in that circumstance of, you know, feeling in a really bad place, I don't answer those phone calls. Like, I don't want to be reached out to, I guess. And I think it was brought up a couple of times, like, you know, what is there anything kind of, it's a really tough one, I guess, like, how do you help someone who doesn't want to be helped? But is there anything else kind of that's being discussed as like a method of like following up with these people who, you know, it's easy for me to say now when I'm in a okay frame of mind, but when you're not, it's so hard to be reached out to. But is there any kind of research being done as to what could work or what we could chase up, I guess, with these things? I'm sorry, that's a tough one.
Yeah. Look, it is a tough one, and I guess a couple of responses. So there are some models where they actually do home visits, and the aim is to actually keep people from getting to that point. So helping people to start recognising what are some of the warning signs that they're actually starting to head down that path, and in trying to engage with them before they reach that point where they've turned the phone off, locked the doors and shut everyone out. So that's the ideal, and that's part of that whole safety planning approach around, so, you know, what are the signs things aren't going so well for you? A lot of these problems are, a lot of our reactions to these things are quite automatic. So there is some work being done in getting people, when they're well, at kind of over practicing their responses, so that they don't necessarily resort back to those more automatic and sometimes less helpful reactions to a crisis. So there is a bit of work, but it's, yeah, as I said, it's not an easy problem to solve. If people have reached that point where they've shut down, then we are relying, hopefully, on family to recognise and to help that person. So, and I think, as the lady behind you said, sometimes family's not that well equipped to do that. So yes, I think we need to be equipping loved ones to actually to help out a bit. I can see a hand going up.
Thanks, Fiona. And just to introduce myself, I'm Camille Plant, Clinical Advisor at the Way Back Support Service. Just to add to what Fiona's been saying, and to kind of also talk about for people that have withdrawn a little bit, certainly there's the Beyond Now app that's been mentioned that you can access on the Beyond Blue website. There's also the suicide callback service, and yes, that's the phone element, but also they do online chat. So if you were feeling like, I just want to, you know, potentially, you know, texting is a bit easier, you could do that through that forum. You could just go to the website and start to chat to someone. And also there's some mood gym and some e-health kind of resources as well that could be accessed. And then the question before from the gentleman about what kinds of things get asked when the Way Back calls people, it's just that, as Jeff was saying, that very frank conversation. How are you? What's been happening? How can we help you since you've been discharged from hospital? What have the hospital recommended for you? But also, are there any things that we could also think about that might be helpful, like financial counselling or family support services, or contacting Centrelink, and can we meet up and have a coffee and get to know each other and see how we can help you? So yeah, it's definitely not a that we ask these 5 questions, but we certainly check in directly about their safety, and also talk about, you know, where to from here kind of thing. So it's a bit of a strengths-based approach. But yeah, thank you very much to the panel for your very honest and real discussion and your questions back to us. And yeah, and thank you also to Tegan and Katie for this wonderful forum. It's very lovely to see everyone.
Just Fiona, I don't know, is there a possible way, or is there a suicide database, like people who have had serious attempts of suicide? Is there a database? So when they come into hospital, say the martyr, their file is automatically flagged and sent straight to a suicide database. So it's, because what I find also is that repeating of the story. I've had 10 years of it.
Yes.
I don't want to repeat my story over and over again to somebody new all the time. So is there a way that if these people who have had sort of serious attempts of life, is there a database that we could set up maybe and that gets automatically flagged, and then have guess, something like a suicide hotline to make sure that these people are monitored or, you know, checked in on or something like that?
I might actually defer to you, Chris, on that question about the local health data system. So the answer at the national level is no, there's not. So health departments operate at the state level, and each hospital will have its own slightly different version. But you're touching on a point around, first, people do get sick of telling their story over and over again, and it kind of feels like, what's the point, because no one's actually listening. So I think there is some merit in what you're saying, and one of the systems barriers that we're trying to overcome is that information sharing and some misunderstandings about the extent to which health professionals can actually share information, and they can actually share information. It's just about some of the information systems not really facilitating that very well, I think. So there is a model called Zero Suicide, which is a health systems approach to suicide prevention, and it actually is about that data-driven and information-driven approach to suicide prevention. So these things are possible. I'm just not sure how it operates at the Newcastle level. So do you mind, Chris?
I'll break it otherwise. We certainly don't keep an overall database, but as we increasingly go to electronic medical records, when you're presenting, we will put alerts on files, that sort of thing. But also, what we can do is quickly find your history. History is really interesting in that people go, I do not want to tell my history again. But the problem is, if you tell me your life story and then I write it down later on, I won't give it the same weighting that you would give. I won't, there may be some things that are in or out. And so I think in terms of presentations, in terms of crisis, I think it makes a lot of sense. I do not want to tell my history again. But I think when people are starting to engage in longer term work with a new person, as a therapist, I can read your records, I can read what you've done with other people, but I actually find it really powerful to hear from you which parts of that are most important to you. So I think we're still going to be asking people's histories. I think we've just got to get better at deciding when that's useful. Because we're all trained in, what do you do first? Well, you take somebody's history. And we've got to kind of get away from that. Going back to the phone calls, the phone calls are interesting just in terms of complexity. What we know is that things like the callback programs, just made reference, can be really useful for some people. Equally, what we've also looked at is mental health services at times will make too big a reliance on telephone calls. And so one of the messages we're sending out is, do not rely on telephone. You know, if you're just doing risk assessments, follow-up, and you're not actually seeing the person face-to-face, then at least when we're looking at the suicides, we see that as increasing risk. And so it is about trying to work out what works for what person when, and in terms of who answers the phone when, once again, the better working relationship you have with somebody, the better that can be sorted through. So if I try and think about the DBT program, so we provided an on-call service from 8:30 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. We used to provide it 365 and a quarter days a year, but it now gets closed for a couple of weeks over Christmas. That was both for patients to ring us and for us to ring patients when we had concern. And sometimes we needed to kind of sort through, how do we get you to answer the phone? So in health, for instance, we're supposed to use blocked phone numbers. So some people would say, I never answer a blocked number that comes in because I don't know who it is that's chasing me. And so it is about how do we do this. Do we text? Do we call? Some people will think that phones aren't phones anymore. You don't talk to people on them. And so it's about trying to work out what works best. And look, that's trial and error between the people at any point in time. Do the best we can.
Jeff, I was just wondering, I can talk really loud.
Cyberspace.
Hear me? Yeah. I was just wondering if alcohol was an issue with you while you're feeling low.
Yes, definitely.
So in having suicidal thoughts, alcohol's a very big depressant. Did things happen when you were under the influence? More so than...
Mostly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because I learned to use alcohol as a pretty big crutch, and self-medicated quite regularly with alcohol to keep myself going. I was still functional. I was still turning up for work every day, but you gave me a day or 2 days off, and certainly alcohol certainly exacerbated my feelings, and like my bad feelings and low feelings. Yeah, so it played a significant role. Yeah.
So where's your drinking now that you're feeling that you've got a better hold on life?
Yeah, well, basically since I've been back from St John of God, which was only a month ago, I'm abstaining from alcohol. Yeah, and I'm avoiding going out to licensed premises or...
Your situation is very common when people are under the influence. They tend to make the wrong decisions.
Oh, definitely.
And then, okay,
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
No worries.
I was also just wondering because I recently started studying medicine. So another kind of spanner in the works for me was I hadn't experienced it before, but my GP and psychologist actually, it got pretty bad recently, and they wanted to admit me to the MADA. But something I hadn't experienced before was like I was very reluctant for that to happen, because now I know people who are doctors in MADA and particularly in the psychology services, and I get that we're one very small group of a very big picture. But is there kind of any like research or I don't know, again, like any different approach to people in that circumstance? Because we're a bit of a high risk group sometimes, and we don't kind of want to be exposed to our colleagues in that sort of circumstance. So,
So if, for instance, you work within Hunter New England Local Health District later on and you were to become unwell, one of the things we would look at would be supporting an admission either in another district or depending on what private health insurance that you had. But in terms of coming through, and to put this in context, at any point in time in our DBT programs and at the Centre for Psychotherapy, we would have a number of trainee health professionals. And to me, that's kind of that reminder that we all live on the same continuums, we all carry the various risks. And indeed, we've been going long enough that we've had people come through that program who are now our colleagues. Some of them, and I'll give them credit for being brave. It must be really hard to kind of come through that process and then come back as a colleague. It must be easy to become a colleague in a different part of the health service. But yeah, so, and I guess the other thing is the issue around stigma. And so if I think about my experience in working in mental health services, stigma is coming down. Stigma is alive and well. I'd like to say it's all gone away. There are some diagnoses now where the stigma is much, much less, and there are some where it's alive and well. And certainly when we were running our training around DBT, we initially thought we were going to be teaching people how to do therapy. And what we very quickly realised that we need to put a whole section in around stigma. At its worst, back in the early days, I can remember one health professional saying, but shouldn't we treat these people in jail? Now, I had just finished reading an up-house select committee on mental health problems in our jails, and so I thought, yeah, of course we should treat this in jails. And then the penny dropped. They were actually saying, if you have this diagnosis, shouldn't we put you in jail and then treat you there? Now, I've not heard anything as horrific as that in recent times, but it does take a while for things to change. It's something we're focusing on, but it takes a while to lose old ideas. Sorry, does that answer you?
it does.
Okay.
Can I just ask one more question? While we're here, any chance of revamping the mental health board?
Sorry?
Have you actually ever thought about what you put us into down at the mental health wards? Have you actually seen the state of the ward? And you're saying we should go into prison. Sometimes I think I probably would be better in the prison system than down there. Have you thought about or had any research as the difference in the environment would make with those people as opposed to having bare walls and nothing around?
No problem. Take it.
I just wanted to give you a little feedback from my brother. When I communicate with him when he's unwell, I come in and spend time with him. He personally is more interested in connecting with the programs that are on offer than worrying about what the ward looks like for him. So he's more interested in, I want to play table tennis, I want to, you know, shoot some hoops, I want to do some art therapy. You know, he's quite open to engaging in some programs while he's here that keeps him occupied when he's here. But from a family's perspective, I can see where you're going with that. I would like to think, you know, let's do some more yarn bombing, or let's paint the walls nice, or, you know, let's make it aesthetically pleasing, and make it an environment where we can feel a bit happier.
I'm not sure what to say about the design of our hospitals. What can I say? They're a lot better than they were, and they can be an awful lot better. I find going down onto the acute units here disorientating. I walk in, despite the fact I've been walking in and out of those since they built that place, I can still easily get lost down there. In terms of design, what's occurred is designed to make it much, much safer, to cut down actually the risks of suicide. So I was part of a review about 10 years back now where we looked at inpatient suicides, and in particular we were looking at the buildings. So part of the units that have been built since then have much better observation from nursing stations. There's much less in the way of blind spots, but more importantly, getting rid of all the hanging points. You know, the rails that give you privacy with the screens around your bed, if you attempt to hang yourself from them, they fall out of the roof. And so that's where the focus has been. But I'm not sure how you make an acute mental health unit a jolly place. Yeah.
Maybe colours, maybe a little bit more inviting for both. I mean, I know when I go in there, although I hate it, it's actually a very safe space.
Yeah.
So on one hand I hate it, but on the other I know it's a very safe space. Yeah, probably.
You could share some of those opinions with the unit staff. That would be good.
I mean, certainly we've had some of the courtyards down there painted so they look less like you're inside an institution. But I do know when that was first built that they had ladders coming up out of the heading as if they were going over a wall. It was supposed to be artistic, I've got no idea.
There's a question.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask in terms of early intervention and prevention, working with and communication with other people who are working with these people, particularly young people. That's the area I'm working on, school counsellor. I mean, I'm aware that things are happening as far as improving communication between health and education and all those sorts of things, but I'm wondering if anyone can tell us all a bit about what's happening in that area and how we can all work together better to support our young people before we get to a critical point. So I guess as part of the Lifespan project, we are looking at early intervention and prevention, and particularly with young people in schools. So looking at doing some universal prevention programs where all students within a particular year will go through a program. And we looked at the evidence for 3 programs. There is one which is very much about changing the culture within the school around help seeking, building peer support networks, which didn't have as good evidence in terms of suicidal outcomes, but was quite strong in terms of increasing help seeking and so on. There was another one which is called Youth Aware Mental Health, which is the one that we've actually gone with. And it's got really quite good evidence that if you deliver this program in schools around about year 9, that you do actually get reductions in severe suicidal ideation and in suicide attempts. Now, as part of that, it is also necessary to look at the referral pathways, obviously. So, you know, in our research, we will be asking young people how they're going, whether they've had suicidal thoughts, so on. So there is a chance that we'll identify some young people who are at risk. And as part of the work that we're doing with, I was about to say Keegan and Katie, but Keegan and Katie, we are also looking at how do we support those young people. For some of them, they will be wanting to maintain some confidentiality, so they won't necessarily want the teachers to know. And in fact, this program is not delivered by teachers for that reason. So it's delivered by external facilitators. So there is another way that people can actually put their hand up and admit that they're not doing so well and might need some help. So there are some really good evidence-based programs around that are delivered through schools, and they're coming to schools near you very soon. So watch this space.
Just a quick one. I was still knocking up in Muswellbrook asking people about their attitudes to coal mining. Yeah. And the whole town is depressed, and it's like the Gate Alliance. But we've been up there a few times, and last time we were up there, there'd been like a recent suicide, and it was a couple of them actually. So that's kind of like a community, which is, you could arguably say, this is like going to be a really high-risk community. A few people said that people are very isolated, and do you do that sort of stuff to actually like look at communities that could be at particular risk?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of things. The first is that something like Lifespan might be suitable for a community like that, but actually there is work that needs to be done at a different level, I think. So we know that there are certainly social determinants of suicide, and if you've got a community where there's high levels of unemployment, low levels of income, and not a lot of hope, then you do have a community that's at risk. The extent to which a health system intervention can actually fix that is, I guess, open to question. I think it can certainly help, but it is also the kind of area where you also need some economic intervention to support people. So people need employment, they need a sense of purpose, and they need a sense of hope. And the health system can assist, but it's not, I think it's fair to say it's probably not the answer to the problem. What we're looking at the Black Dog Institute in the future is, I won't call it that Lifespan 2.0, but it is actually more around what are some of the policy issues that we need to be influencing in order to have that, that impact on suicide at the population level. And they are around things like employment policies and how do you support people if they do lose their job. Alcohol policy, which probably shouldn't surprise anyone, gun control, all of those sorts of policy issues that are not necessarily related to health systems directly.
Sentiment robo-debt.
Yeah, look, and that's been a trigger for a lot of people. So, you know, sometimes it's that last straw that really can tip people over the edge. I think also we need to be working with communities for them to come up with their own solutions to some of these things, because sometimes the answers do lie within the community as well. So communities can rally quite a strong response, and it's about making sure that that response is at least somewhat grounded in the evidence around what actually works to prevent suicide.
Hi, I'm Katrina from Hunter Primary Care, and we run a large number of mental health services in primary care settings, clinical suicide services as well as the way back service. And I guess the topic is about closing gaps and helping people and communities as well fall through gaps. And we've touched on communication a little bit between sectors. People mentioned public and private. We've certainly touched on communication between people who need help and the people around them. But I was wondering what the panel's thoughts are in this technological age, when we've all got, well, most of us have got mobile devices. What improvements does the panel think that can be leveraged from that to improve communication at all levels? So between service sectors, between providers, between people and their families in healthcare.
to respond.
Text your response.
I don't have an answer when it comes to technological communication. I'm really poor at it. I think it's best if we can communicate verbally through all stages. It's going to improve the way that we communicate, whether we're here in service, out in community, whether families are advocating for their loved ones, whether professionals are advocating for, you know, community individuals, consumers. We have to improve the way we communicate collectively between one another and between family members at a really early age. You know, we need to start being more responsible across the board for any communication we can have. Technology, I don't know.
So, Katrina, I'm not sure this is going to answer your question because I think you were talking more about communication across sectors and between health professionals. And I'm not sure it's a question I can answer. I'm not an expert in that area, but I can answer around some of the e-mental health interventions that are in place. And you know, I think ultimately our aim is to get people talking more face-to-face. Sometimes though people are not quite ready for that. And so that's where I think things like apps, mobile phones, websites can actually be really helpful. So you talked before about not necessarily wanting to talk to people when you're in that really bad space. But people are sometimes willing to get online and use chat services. There is a lot of research now around getting people to monitor how they're going using their devices. They've got their devices with them all the time and using that a way of tracking how they're going. We've done some research with young Aboriginal people who are at risk, and I don't know how many people here remember being 17, but I know when I was 17 I would not talk to anyone about my deepest, darkest secrets. And it's the same for a lot of young people, but they will use an app as a starting point. So I think there is a space for these interventions in the spectrum of interventions. And some of the feedback that we were getting from the young Aboriginal people over in Broome was that they didn't know how to talk about these problems, and having been through this app-based intervention, it actually gave them the words to talk about their thoughts and their feelings, so if they did want to go and put their hand up and get some help face-to-face, they were better equipped to do so. So I think there's some really interesting research taking place in the intervention space with people who either have a diagnosis or who are at risk, including actually an app which monitors whether you've left your house for a week. And if you haven't, it sends you a message saying, hey, looks like you haven't left the house for a week. How about you look at one of those things that you said you enjoy doing and go out and do it? So I think there are some really clear ways that technology can be used, but I don't think I can really respond all that well to your question around technology and the use of that to help health professionals communicate better. It's a bit of a gap, I think.
Oh no, I haven't got any answers.
I've got someone who's going to respond to that, but I'll let you come back to you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Morag from the Primary Health Network, and I've worked in the electronic health space for quite a number of years, and which is very well known to general practice. So anyone who watched the budget last night would have noticed somewhere amongst all those messages that there has been many, many more millions pushed towards electronic health records. So chances are your general practitioner may be using that system, and yes, certainly at the moment it's generally information that's pulled out regarding medication, current diagnosis, etc. that is an electronic record that is nationwide. Getting psychologists and other health professionals to use it, there's some sticking points in regards to clinical software or using computer systems, etc. But there's a massive push currently to get that moving, particularly with electronic referrals, so which we're currently piloting in our area. So there is a lot of work being done in sharing records electronically, and there is the My Health record has been with us for about 5 years now. So that would be a good space for the lady sitting here. I don't know her name, but you could have your record and your history put in that space to travel with you throughout the health system.
I'm mindful of the time, so we're going to squeeze one last comment in.
Okay. Well, I suppose I'm going to follow on from that. My name's Mark Cantor. I'm a consumer rep with Hunter New England Health, but I'm also not like many other consumer reps. I come from an industry full of technology, full of organisational design, systems engineering and all that sort of business. And that's one of the things that in the 6 months I've been involved as a consumer rep, that health is somewhere between 20 and 30 years behind the rest of the world. And everyone laughs and says, oh, well, that's just health. Why? You know, why are we playing with phone calls? And is anyone in Hunter New England Health enabled, trained, do you even have access via your computer to access some of these things? And I know the answer is no. And there is another example is the University of Heidelberg has developed an app in conjunction with some other major IT players to monitor pregnancy and look for, so pregnant women are asked to sign up to this app, they get fed lots of information. One of the requirements is that they continue to keep a bit of a journal on the app. And the app actually offloads the data, and the University of Heidelberg is using it as part of big data to make analysis of postnatal, prenatal depression. So they're actually using, you know, big data science to look at a person's mood from the things they're writing. And as you said, there's a possibility of an app that doesn't recognise you haven't gone outside your house. You can throw some things, you know, we've got wristbands that everyone wears. That there is huge opportunities in new technologies to contribute and help in this area. And I suppose the ultimate question is how, because there's a lot of people in the community that have a lot of skills that can help here, but they actually just bang up against the health system that they can't get in to help, and the health system won't look to them for help. So I suppose the question is, how do we improve that community health system, and not community as in patients, as in community as in technologists and experts in organisational design, system design, IT system design. How can we bridge that gap between those people that are out there busting to help and the health system, which is perhaps not very good at looking towards them?
Unfortunately, because of the constraints of time, we might leave that as something for us to all ponder upon. As you said, it's probably not something we'll all be able to solve sitting here, but certainly a really important point to raise, and feel free to continue that conversation privately afterwards. But I am mindful that it's time for us to wrap up. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for also people who shared their own lived experience from the audience, as well as our panel today. But please join me in thanking our wonderful panel. Thank you to Katie and Tegan for organising this today, the Lifespan team, the Primary Health Care Network, our cameraman, people out there in cyberspace. We hope you've enjoyed your inaugural Expert Insights here in Newcastle. You've all got some forms there to fill in some comments. If there's anything on your mind about the evening, things we can do differently or improve, please jot it down. But thanks again, and thank you once again for being here with us tonight.
Thanks, Mary. Thank you.